At the dawn of the 19th century, Britain has the largest empire in history. Across this vast realm, millions live in poverty and starvation, denied the most basic human rights. But a spirit of angry revolution is in the air. Those who challenge the government are exiled to a prison colony on the far side of the globe. Over the next 80 years, 3,600 political prisoners are sent to the empire's Guantanamo Bay, Australia. The British government believes that distance will bring silence, but instead, rebel voices return to haunt them. Irish, Welsh, English, American, Canadian, Maori, West Indians. They do not go quietly. In their alien new land, they continue the struggle for justice. Their actions in their home countries are well known, but their stories in Australia have been forgotten. In Hobart, Tasmania, Billy Bragg, Mick Thomas and Lisa O'Neill come together for a concert that will bring to life the forgotten stories of the Empire's rebels and how they inspired the creation of modern democracy in Australia decades before Britain.
Out of earshot, out of earshot. Don't you speak my name in passing, nor my memory defends. In this world everlasting, save your full disdain for them, for the ones who built these prisons, for the ones who built these walls. Walls of time, walls of distance, to never hear me call. Across the years, across the ocean, to a land justice forgot. Out of time, out of luck, out of earshot.
The year is 1793. The world is in turmoil. At a time when kings and emperors rule with an iron fist, change is in the air. In America, the British king has been kicked out by democratic revolutionaries who create a new form of government for the people, by the people. In France, the king loses his head and a republic is declared. Both events shake Britain to its core. The country is racked by radical dissent and her swelling cities are engulfed in a wave of crime. The Crown responds by seizing the east coast of Australia and Van Diemen's Land, dispossessing the indigenous population and setting up the most feared prisons in the empire.
You've got to remember that when the penal colony was founded, Great Britain as a political entity wasn't even 100 years old. The Union of the Parliaments in 1707 created something new, something corporate. But people's allegiances remained to the countries of their birth, to England, to Scotland, to Ireland, and to Wales.
The Irish in particular refused to embrace the idea of Great Britain. Instead, they looked to Europe for inspiration. For centuries, Ireland has been under the yoke of British rule. However, the new wave of idealism sweeping the globe gives hope for change in Ireland.
The American Revolution in the 1770s led to a series of attempts to reform the system of election in the Irish Parliament. And then later on, the French Revolution. The French Revolution had a major impact on radical opinion or reforming opinion in Ireland. Now, both revolutions bring a new vocabulary of democracy and liberty, a much more open and more modern, recognizably democratic way of thinking. The United Irishmen were specifically really set up as a result of the French Revolution.
The United Irishmen bring together Protestants and Catholics who want to change the political system. Their aim is to create a more democratic country through peaceful protest, but the British respond to their demands with an iron fist.
The main reason that the United Irishmen moved into open rebellion, into physical force, was that their original attempt to achieve change through political means failed.
In 1798, a ragtag rebel army of 20,000 farmers and labourers makes a stand for freedom against a better armed and trained British army at Vinegar Hill in County Wexford. The bloody battle that took place here will be forever etched into the Irish psyche.
If that 1798 rebellion, having been embarked upon, had succeeded, and had it gone the way of the US Revolution, then the influence of Ireland in Europe as a liberal democratic country would have been considerable.
His eye was mounted on the scaffold high. My aged father was standing by. My aged father did me deny. The name he gave me was the Croppy Boy. Was in Dungannon, this young boy died.
British Army prevail and that revolution is put down. But it's not just put down, there are savage reprisals. There are mobile gallows at one stage, so many people are executed and killed.
Go shed a tear for the Croppy Boy.
The rout at Vinegar Hill doesn't mark the end for the United Irishmen. The rebellion goes underground. One hot spot was in County Tipperary, near the town of Clonmel, where a small band of guerrilla fighters are harassing the British at every turn. They are led by a stonemason called Philip Cunningham. Little is known about his life before 1798, but he is a natural leader of men.
Right. What's your reaction?
Agus sinna ní anam dé wa festa go. Bear na hamas ga bhfuil a thugad.
Cunningham is on borrowed time. Betrayed by an informer, he is captured in late 1799 and sentenced to death. But the killing has to stop. His sentence is commuted to transportation. He is exiled to Australia, leaving his family behind. He would never see them again. By the time he leaves Ireland, there are already 460 United Irish convicts in the colony.
Being transported in the late 18th century across oceans to a place called Botany Bay will put terror into the hearts of the people to be punished, but also their families. So in a sense, it was the British government trying to quieten down the countryside, but it didn't.
In Sydney, the English governor is alarmed at the imminent arrival of more Irish rebels.
The Anne brings 137 of the most desperate and diabolical characters that could be selected from that cursed nation. This means that those who avow a determination not to lose sight of what it is they are bound to as united Irishmen now number 600. And they are ready and waiting an opportunity to put their plan into action. Dispatch it.
Governor King is right to be worried. Just off the coast of South America, Cunningham and the other United Irish prisoners attempt to take over their prison ship by force.
Philip Cunningham, you've been sentenced to 100 lashes for making mutiny against His Majesty's ship. Have you anything to say for yourself?
I do not recognize your crown or your authority.
Bosun, proceed.
Aaron Gabra!
It's possible that the British misjudged the impact which the United Irishmen could have in Australia. And to a certain extent, the authorities in Britain and Ireland who are getting rid of the United Irishmen, it's no longer their problem when they go to Australia, it's somebody else's problem.
When Cunningham arrives in Sydney, the entire European population of the colony is just over 5,000 people. Militant and angry Irish rebels now comprise around 12% of all colonists.
When the Irish stepped ashore in Sydney, they were confronted by an alien landscape. Strange trees, heat, insects they'd never seen, and it was the other side of the world. Many of them didn't even know geographically where they were. It's like being sent to the dark side of the moon. And very quickly found that they were part of a machine, if you like, a machine that was akin in some ways to slavery. Another problem that would have confronted the Irish prisoners is that they're clearly in the thrall of an English colony.
Come on, man!
And that means that the language that they speak, many of them speak Gaelic, their overseers are mainly English people. So the ascendancy, the English ascendancy, the Protestant ascendancy they knew back in Ireland confronted them again.
The convicts sent to New South Wales in the early 1800s are part of a cruel system where the slightest infringement results in a flogging, and the Irish are flogged more than most.
What had inspired them to start was to free their native land, Ireland, from what they saw as an invader. That inspiration, that desire, didn't go away just because they were somewhere else. They were simply in a prison which was far away. And all they wanted to do was to escape from that prison and get back and finish the job they had started.
In 1804, a ship brings news from Ireland. United Irish leader Robert Emmet has been hanged, drawn and quartered in the streets of Dublin. On the 4th of March, Cunningham and his men decide the time has come to overthrow their jailers and return home.
This is the day we finish what we started at Vinegar Hill. I want you all to think of Robert Emmet as you walk out of here tonight. How they spilt his blood in the streets of Dublin. Tonight, we overthrow our jailers, raise the sword of liberty for Ireland once again. I march on Castle Hill, and then on to Sydney and take a ship for home. Do your country proud. Death or liberty? For Emmet. For Emmet. Right, men. Move out.
Cunningham commands a force of nearly 300 convicts. Most are United Irishmen. Their first target is the government armoury.
Take them away.
Facing little resistance, they take control of a third of the arms in the colony. Cunningham's plans are coming together.
Come on, time is of the essence. Quick! Go! Go!
The rebels split into groups and go from farm to farm, burning and looting. They take more weapons and rum. Lots of rum. As the night wears on, discipline begins to break down. Things are about to get worse. Cunningham is betrayed by one of his own, who reveals their location to the governor. On the morning of the 5th of March 1804, troops arrive at the rebel camp at Castle Hill outside Sydney. Cunningham's plans are falling apart.
Damn it! God damn it! Mark my words, men. We Irish are the makers of our own downfall. We get our own in Ishak. My men stand ready for the fight. Avoid further bloodshed, we come to parley.
Are you their leader?
Yes.
I arrest you in the name of His Majesty. Sergeants, take him away!
You can't do that! That's a flag of peace!
Prepare to fire!
Where's your honor, sir? Here's your honor, sir!
Fire at will!
The rebels are outgunned, and the battle is over in minutes.
Here in Australia, the only echo of 1798, the Irish uprising, is our own Vinegar Hill. And there were many dreams associated with it. But one of them was the restoration of equity. These men lived under a tyranny.
Retribution is swift and merciless. Philip Cunningham is hanged without a trial.
You a fine man, Mr. Cunningham. If a rope on your throat or was your last hug below me.
His body is left swinging on the rope as a warning to other would-be rebels.
Would a tree hang a leaf, would a robin a wren, but men do men do men, hangman, hangman. If I place a board bath under your feet, maybe you'd see the same sky as me. It's not the same sky they're seeing back home. No sight of a plough, but the same moon and sun, moon and sun. The Southern Cross is the cross I bear since I landed under this hemisphere. do not recognize the stars in the sky, who reroute me for to dream at night, sleep tight.
Cunningham's time was short and brutal, but his failed revolution lives on in the hearts of generations of Irish Australians.
My hands might help to colonize, but not my heart and not my...
While the British government quells resistance in Australia, in Ireland, political freedom is all but dead. The Irish Parliament has been abolished. The country is now ruled from London as part of the United Kingdom. Democracy is virtually extinct, but there are those who refuse to give up. In the Wicklow Hills, south of Dublin, a 4-year guerrilla conflict is fought against the British Army. The rebels are led by a farmer called Michael Dwyer, a man who saw many of his family slaughtered in the 1798 rebellion. Known as the Wicklow Chief, he mounts a brilliant resistance, leading thousands of British soldiers on a merry dance.
Remove that obstacle!
Although there is a high price on his head, Dwyer is a master tactician.
We remember him specifically because, of course, even though the rebellion itself was over within, 5-6 months, Dwyer held out, and he stayed out with 50 or 60 men. He continued to harry the yeomen and the army. He continued to protect the people in Wicklow. Remember, a lot of retributions after the rebellion was down. Dwyer, in return, would come and attack them. Very much a Robin Hood kind of character. In Irish mythology, probably the nearest thing we would have to Robin Hood. But his primary objective, of course, as with all of the United Irishmen, was A, for a fairer government, and B, ultimately, for a free country.
However, by 1803, the noose is tightening on Dwyer.
Coats! Give me an ish! Give you! Need a mower. Give me that! Follow the earth.
He and his band of loyal followers are never defeated in the field. He surrenders only when the British capture his family.
He surrendered to Lord Hume, and his terms were very simple, that he would not be a prisoner, that he would be sent to the United States. He accepted he couldn't stay in Ireland, that he'd be sent to the United States with his wife and children as a free man.
The British renege on the deal, and Dwyer is exiled to New South Wales without sentence. He arrives in the colony in 1805, and although he is a free man, he immediately comes to the attention of the notorious Governor Bligh of Mutiny on the Bounty fame.
It was reported to Bligh that Dwyer was stirring things up, that he was saying that all Irish will be free in Australia, and these could have been absolutely false. Dwyer certainly denied them, but he was brought to court for this sedition.
The public gallery is full of admiring Irish men and women. He mounts his own defence and uses the courtroom as his personal soapbox.
The evidence given against me takes the most cruel and despicable form. I have been accused of treason by Governor Bligh. Not the first of the false accusations against me since my exile to this colony. The governor of this colony continues to work against me, even as I try to make a new life for myself in this land. Order! Order!
Have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honour. Not guilty.
Bligh is enraged and overturns the verdict. Dwyer is banished to the hellhole of Norfolk Island and later sent to Van Diemen's Land. However, Dwyer is a popular man, particularly with the hard-drinking British soldiers. In 1808, Bligh is overthrown by his own troops and Dwyer is released later that year.
All Irishmen will be free! Let me hear you! Free! Free!
Dwyer is brought back, in fact rises through the society over the next couple of decades. He becomes a police constable, he becomes a publican, and kind of completes the Irish trifecta by being a bit of a folk singer.
Wicklow chief is coming home, not to the place where he was born, to rest down by a southern sea, gravestone down at Waverley, where an Irishman is finally free, singing hey ho and a barrel of rum, the Wicklow chief is coming home. Hey ho and a barrel of rum, the Wicklow chief is coming home. He lived 9 lives.
But eventually, Dwyer's love of the bottle gets the better of him. One by one, his business interests fail, and he is sent to debtor's prison. In 1825, the last leader of the United Irishmen contracts dysentery and dies. He is buried in a pauper's grave, but not forgotten. Dwyer left behind 7 children and 21 grandchildren in Australia. 100 years after the 1798 rebellion, Irish Australia came together to remember the Wicklow chief. Dwyer was reburied at Waverley Cemetery. More than 100,000 people lined the streets for his final funeral procession.
They say that when his body left St Mary's Cathedral for Waverley Cemetery, it had arrived before the last of the crowd around the cathedral had left. So this was the authenticity of his legend and the authenticity of people's desire for freedom.
He was proof that one could resist. In Australia, he became a rallying point, and he inspired the Irish out there. I think he still does inspire them as somebody who stood up to authority and somebody who proved that, of course, he could become ultimately an Australian, he could become an Irish Australian, and that they would have somebody in their culture that they could look to from the homeland.
I look on those United Irishmen in early New South Wales as, boy, probably despite their drinking habits, angels of enlightenment. And again, an indication of the fact that this was not a bad progeny. This was not a bad set of forebears to lay down for an Australian populace.
As the exiled United Irishmen begin to make a life for themselves in Australia, Britain is swept by protest and revolt. Only those with wealth and land are entitled to vote, but there is a growing demand for a fairer system of government. The new tiger economy of Wales becomes a hotbed of unrest as industrialisation causes misery on a scale never before seen. The town of Newport would become the centre for this resistance.
You could characterise life
for ordinary working people in the South Wales valleys as being short, dangerous and brutal. And it's not an exaggeration, a vicious combination of poor working conditions, also of poor living conditions. Dangers of people being maimed, young children working in mines or in ironworks. Disease was endemic. There's frequent cholera or typhus. And brutal in the sense of 50% of children died before they reached the age of 5.
Disease, industrial accidents, and starvation kill thousands. Workers vent their rage in spontaneous, often violent protest. This is happening all over the United Kingdom.
You have to see what's being done to working people in England as part of the British establishment rather than the English establishment. There's a really important difference there. The British establishment at the time were the imperialists, they were the aristocrats, they were the people who wanted to rule the world, whereas the ordinary working people of England had the same problems and the same complaints as the ordinary working people of Ireland, of Wales, of Scotland. So it's a very important distinction. It's the British Empire, not the English Empire.
From this chaos and misery emerges a new political movement that unites workers. In 1836, Englishman William Lovett devises the People's Charter. At its core, the Charter hopes to create a fairer system of government with votes for all men regardless of wealth.
There was a fundamental split which appeared in Chartism by the late 1830s, and between those who figured that one could push in a democratic and peaceful way for the 6 points of the Charter, and those who saw rebellion, revolution as the only way.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that Chartism in Wales was a bit different. Of course, Chartism was a national movement. You find Chartist activity throughout Britain. But there was an edge to it in Wales.
In the bleak industrial nightmare of South Wales, the Charter becomes a rallying call for men of action. Two key figures emerge, Zephaniah Williams and John Frost. They are unlikely partners. Williams is a mining contractor, a free thinker, and a devout atheist, while Frost is more of an establishment figure, a magistrate and former mayor of Newport. Their plan is to march an army of workers on the town of Newport and drive the Crown out of South Wales. It is a modern working-class rebellion aimed at deposing the hated ruling class.
Once Newport is secure, we will imprison the aristocrats and magistrates. If any of them make the least resistance, they will be put to death. Of course, there are those among them who will not escape.
It's clear there was a great deal of planning and preparation. It's also pretty obvious that a great deal of that planning was done through the medium of the Welsh language. And that's quite important, and it was something which worried the national government.
There's a clear sense here, as far as the Metropolitan in London is concerned, that these are somehow dangerous peripheral areas. Add in the discontent at a lack of political representation and the abuses of the old political system, and you've got a pretty fiery cauldron there indeed.
Come all you bold miners who work in the coalfields, Merthyr, Trevethyn and Abertillery. Hear how we marched in the rain down to Newport to free our dear comrades from captivity. Captivity, captivity. Free our dear comrades from captivity. Should prevail, should prevail. Charters, liberty should prevail. Reform was our watchword as we marched through the midnight. Strong our belief but the redcoats were primed and made by leaving 22 dead and so many in pain.
The Chartist leaders are quickly rounded up.
Well, the trial of the leadership of the Chartists was held in the Shire Hall in Monmouth. And it was in many respects a show trial. And a show trial, it seems to me, with a foregone conclusion. The leaders were convicted and they were sentenced to death.
Now we stand trial on charges of treason. Guilty we're bound.
At the very last moment, the death sentence is commuted to transportation for life.
Why do men who
The British government do not want to create the first martyrs to Chartism.
those who seek more than ballads and bread?
When Frost and Williams arrive in Hobart, the capital of Van Diemen's Land, as educated men, they expect to be given a ticket of leave, allowing them the freedom to live and work in the community.
No more than ballads and bread.
Instead, they are sent directly to Port Arthur, a prison within a prison colony.
Chartism was considered a real threat. These men had taken arms on British soil against Her Majesty's government, and they were considered a clear and present danger.
Van Diemen's Land was, in fact, this was described as a prison without walls. But in order to function, it needed somewhere where people dreaded to be sent. And that's what penal stations like Port Arthur, that was their function. They were meant to be feared. They were like the engine room which kept the colonial unfree labour pump going.
Williams is made a supervisor at the coal mines.
Leave it there with me. Good day's work, boys. Take him down, Gar. Come on in, boys. It's clear. The last two.
The unfortunate Welshman is kidnapped by a group of escaping convicts who are afraid he will report their plans to the authorities. Williams is eventually released and immediately surrenders, but his story is not believed. He is put into solitary confinement at Port Arthur.
The hardboard on which I lie is 18 inches wide. To keep me from the cold, I have just 3 pounds weight of blankets and a parcel of chains around my legs. My boots make a pillow. For 16 weeks, I've been kept in this wretched situation. The truth is that in Van Diemen's Land, the innocent are more often punished than the guilty.
Port Arthur is designed to grind rogues into honest men and to strike fear into the hearts of the general convict population. The more degrading and dehumanizing the punishment, the more brutal the work, the more fear is created. Although prisoners like Williams and Frost are stripped of their freedom and dignity, inexplicably, the British do not take away their pens and ink.
Transportation was more like a loud hailer, in the sense that it created martyrs to these various causes. And in fact, in a global world connected by ship and by journalism and by the capacity to write letters and by the movement of people around it, it was impossible to silence.
The letters written by Williams and Frost add fuel to a growing movement against convict transportation. However, in spite of all the political radicals sent to Australia, it would be a naive young American who would drive the first dagger into the heart of the convict system.
We love Linus Miller, of course, because he's written the best account of the convict system. His book is immensely readable, and it's also very vivid. And so there's a sense that you can really feel what it's like, having to work as a beast of burden, basically. It kind of fits very squarely within the slave narrative. I mean, he's writing at a time that the slave narratives are very popular in America as part of the abolitionist movement leading up to the Civil War.
Born in 1817 in upstate New York, Miller trains as a lawyer, but he is desperate for adventure. Inspired by the American Revolution, in 1838 he joins the American Patriots, a group of young firebrands hell-bent on liberating Canada from British rule.
Do you know the beaver to be a dangerous animal?
No, it is not.
Let me show you the plans.
The Yankee Patriots are a very, very strange organization, a sort of cross between a zealous belief in American republicanism and a kind of Freemasonry organization with a whole set of secret signs and symbols. They believe passionately in extending the American Republic to Canada.
In June 1838, Miller and a band of American patriots cross into Canada near Niagara Falls, where they try to ignite a Canadian revolution.
Listen unto me, there is a country to the north that craves its liberty. The oppressive yoke of England they seek to forget, but if it's freedom they demand, they just don't know it yet. So it's up then, Canadians, this is a call to arms. They're coming from the foundries and the factories and the farms. If you can't hear them marching, I'd be very well surprised. And we'll meet you down in Windsor on the 4th day of July.
They are quickly rounded up by militias and marched into captivity by American slaves who had escaped to Canada.
He was a dreamer, obviously a bit of a self-aggrandizer, and he just got caught up in something that was completely beyond him.
So ended my dreams of a glorious campaign in Canada. Alas, that hope so bright and promising should thus be blasted. For the first time in my life, I felt myself a captive.
Miller was charged with piratical invasion and sentenced to death, but the British do not want to provoke the United States, so the sentence is commuted to transportation. The governor, Sir John Franklin, welcomes him personally to Van Diemen's Land.
Come on, you lot, get in there. Move, move, move.
Not satisfied with being a Republican yourself, you tried to make others so, to set up your institutions in Canada. What makes your case more aggravating is your youth. You are very young to be part of such a wicked rebellion. And a lawyer, too. To break the law yourself and to teach others to do it. Shame on you. Be careful, sir. Van Diemen's Land is not America.
Right, move the prisoners out.
Miller is put to hard labour on a work gang in the Tasmanian Midlands.
A sense of injustice we were suffering at the hands of our enemies was continually burning in my brain.
Keep moving! Get up, you bloody crawler!
I'm an American citizen.
Get up!
I'm a British slave.
He escapes with another Yankee patriot, and they head for Hobart, hoping to escape on an American whaling ship. But after days on the run, they give themselves up and are sent to Port Arthur.
I mean, he's a young man. Port Arthur, which is known to be a single sodomy, if he was not raped, he was probably suffered, a lot of sexual innuendo, a lot of sexual advances, and obviously terrified him.
I think I did not sleep over 2 hours each night. The number of inmates was daily increasing, and the scenes enacted by these wretched men were of the most diabolical of character, too dark to be written, too dreadful to be thought of.
Zephaniah Williams suffers the hell of Port Arthur, but he is made of stern stuff. After his release, he is made a constable and distinguishes himself by quelling a riot at the local asylum. The new governor, Eardley Wilmot, even recommends him for a full pardon. But the authorities in London have still not forgotten about Newport. In desperation, Williams tries to escape once again, but is caught and sent back to the coal mines. As Williams toils at Port Arthur, the anti-transportation movement is gathering steam. This alliance of free settlers, business leaders, and ex-convicts dares to imagine a new self-governing colony, free from the economic and social stigma of forced labour.
The Anti-Transportation League was important because it was the first time that serious colonial resistance to transportation was encountered. Many middle-class individuals who were supporters of the anti-slavery movement were also anti-transportation, but were increasingly joined by working people. Many of them former convicts, or indeed the sons and daughters of former convicts. But of course they were competing with convict labour in order to put bread on the table to feed their children.
Linus Miller is finally pardoned in 1845 and returns home to New York. In America, free from censorship and the control of the British government, he is able to write a searing indictment of the penal system. Notes of an Exile to Van Diemen's Land is a literary sensation, embarrassing the Crown and helping to whip up anti-transportation sentiment across the globe.
It was a carceral society. I mean, there was nothing else quite like it in the world. It was a society that was one big prison. You were under surveillance, you were under the thumb of the imperial state. They watched your every move. There was no sense of personal freedom to be had. This was truly shocking.
As more and more horror stories leak out of Australia, the days of the transportation system are numbered.
To condemn the sword, no, my lord, for by its emerald light a great republic sprung from the colonies of the North Atlantic, and by its shimmering light they asserted their presence upon the face of the earth.
1848 is a year of uprisings right across Europe, and the British Empire is not immune. Two men, one a wealthy Irish aristocrat, the other the son of a freed slave, will help Australia take its next steps towards nationhood. By the mid-1800s, Britain has been at war with itself for almost 50 years. Across the empire, the cries for democracy and basic human rights have reached a crescendo. Those who attack the system are exiled to a prison gulag on the edge of the known world, Australia. But a spirit of angry revolution is in the air. Over 3,600 political prisoners are exiled to the Crown's prison colonies in Australia. The British believe that distance will bring silence, but they are seriously mistaken. Instead, rebel voices return to haunt their colonial masters. Irish, Welsh, English, Scottish, American, Canadian. In their alien new land, they continue to fight for freedom and justice. In 1848, an Irish aristocrat and the son of a West Indian slave will openly challenge the Crown's authority.
William Cuffay?
I'm arresting you for high treason.
Both would go on to be key players in the story of Australian democracy. In Hobart, Tasmania, Billy Bragg, Mick Thomas and Lisa O'Neill come together for a concert that will bring to life the forgotten stories of the Empire's rebels and how they inspired the creation of modern democracy in Australia decades before Britain.
Well, the word come down from Runnymede, fanned by the flames of the Levellers' Creed. The People's Charter must succeed with the rebels of 48. For liberty, reform of the land and the rights of man. For liberty, with the rebels of 48. From Castle Hill to the shining sea, through the Darwin's banks, we would all be free to march the bold new colony where the rebels of 48. For liberty, reform of the land and the rights of man. For liberty, with the rebels of 48.
The British government established Australian prison colonies, believing that it would crush the spirit of those sent to the other side of the world, but the opposite happened. By the early 1840s, a campaign is building against the transportation system. It is driven by political prisoners, entrepreneurs, ex-convicts and free settlers.
You know, the thing about convicts who had ideas were that they did pass them on in their huts in the bush to their children, and you do wonder the extent to which that sort of inheritance then emerged in our early democratic institutions.
They dream of new states with self-government and economic stability, and it is clear to achieve these goals, convict transportation must end.
Finally, the anti-transportation movement became entwined with the struggle for democracy. Why? Well, the British government was imposing convict transportation on the colonies, and there were huge demonstrations. People didn't want this happening. What right did the British government have to impose this on them? So that became a call for control of their own government.
John Frost is one of those prepared to challenge the system. As a magistrate and former mayor of Newport in Wales, he has seen at first hand the diabolical conditions the Industrial Revolution has brought to his native land. In 1839, he and fellow Chartist Zephaniah Williams march an army of coal miners and iron workers on the town of Newport, their aim to drive British rule out of South Wales. The uprising is an abject failure. Frost and Williams are transported to Van Diemen's Land for life.
I mean, this is a detention colony. This is where punishments are being handed out liberally for the very smallest of offences.
The raw savagery of Port Arthur leaves a deep impression on him. Transportation was meant to silence politicals like Frost, but he is irrepressible. A citizen of the Republic of Letters, he writes a series of polemics attacking the system.
Benevolence is scarcely known here, but every kind of tyranny imaginable practiced with impunity. This is a place of the most remorseless barbarity. What men endure here is incredible, and I am not possessed of language to describe it. It is hell on earth.
As Frost's communications continue and more people start picking up the stories that he's sharing with people back home, Frost does begin to incur what can only be described as the wrath of the local authorities there. And it doesn't take long until Frost is put under quite difficult personal circumstances where he's put to hard labour.
At 57 years of age, Frost is not a young man, and although back-breaking work takes a toll on him, he is a survivor.
Get back to work.
After 14 years as convicts, Frost and his fellow Chartist rebel Zephaniah Williams are finally granted pardons, but they are banned from returning home. Now a free man, Williams returns to the trade he knows best,
This is the one, Collins.
coal mining.
Let's peg the claim out.
He embraces the entrepreneurial spirit sweeping the colony. Frost, however, sees no future for himself in Tasmania.
My old friend, I will miss you. I wish you'd stay. This land is ripe with opportunity.
The prejudice against us is too great. No help will ever be extended to a prisoner, nor to one who has been a prisoner, no matter how noble his intention. But I do wish you luck with your endeavors.
Frost travels to the United States. He finds a willing audience for his tirades against transportation.
I wish you now to listen to the state of society in Van Diemen's Land and the consequences resulting from the convict code. The cursed laws of England have brought the colony to the same wretched state as all others. Under the system introduced by Lord John Russell, each probation station has become a Gomorrah, full of crime, misery, and disease. It must end. It must end.
The radical discourse of the 19th century, particularly the pamphlets of political prisoners, is peppered with accounts of the brutality, the debasement, the dehumanisation of convicts, and what that leads to. And it leads to brutality, but it also leads to what he calls Gomorrah, by which he means homosexual acts. And this is used time and again to highlight the evils of the empire. And Frost is at pains to connect what happens in Van Diemen's Land to what is happening in Britain. So the convict system is the ugly side, the underworld side, if you like, of the imperial economic system.
As Britain is fighting against the anti-transportation movement, across the English Channel, Europe is in political turmoil. 1848 is known as the springtime of nations. All over the continent, working people are rising up against unfair rulers and governments.
This is the age of revolution in Europe, so it's a particularly fermented period. And Britain and Ireland, United Kingdom, are looking over their shoulder at what's happening in Europe, either with fear or with expectation.
In Ireland, a new movement emerges, Young Ireland. Their aim is to create a new ideal of Irish nationhood, a democratic, free and fair country, politically and culturally independent from Britain. They are committed to peaceful methods.
Well, during the 19th century, there is a movement towards reform, towards political reform. And in a sense, 1848 is the crescendo of this movement. It's a time of hope where political radicals believe that they can reform a political system on liberal lines, a political system which is seen as deeply corrupt.
One of the Young Ireland leaders is the aristocrat and Member of Parliament, William Smith O'Brien.
William Smith O'Brien was a direct descendant of Brian Boru, the medieval Irish High King. He was also part of an aristocratic Irish family that had converted to Protestantism after the Cromwellian invasions. Smith O'Brien is that very sort of gentlemanly, aristocratic, but liberal-minded, reform-minded MP.
However, all that changes in 1845 when Ireland's potato harvest is destroyed by a fungal blight. When the harvest fails again the following year, hundreds of thousands of rural poor perish from starvation and disease. O'Brien becomes increasingly angry while the British government sits on its hands.
Is this wise? Look around you. We cannot stand by as our people starve in the midst of plenty. Every tide carries enough corn to feed thousands of Irish men, women and children. The Almighty may have sent this potato blight, But mark my words. The English created the famine.
O'Brien is radicalised by the potato famine. He sees this as the end of English legitimacy in governing Ireland.
Can we stand idly by?
At the beginning of the famine, there's something in the order of 8.5 million people in Ireland. During the famine, over 5 years, 1.5 million people died of starvation or related diseases. Another, at least 1 million, left the country. So well over a quarter of the population vanished during this period.
The time for culture and talking is over, and that something militant must be done to achieve change.
I do not profess disloyalty to the Queen of England, but it shall be the study of my life to overthrow the dominion of this Parliament over Ireland. I would gladly accept the most ignominious death, rather than witness the sufferings and the indignities inflicted by this legislature upon my countrymen during the last 30 years.
He makes the revolution inevitable by a fiery speech in Parliament and begins going amongst the people, recruiting and encouraging an uprising.
We do make comics, cabbage, born in around the rebel feet. Bullets skim my scolored skull and can't define defeat. Mark my words, potato was the only crop that failed. Black leaves on one pretty plant, a million morning veils.
A million morning veils. A million morning veils.
In July 1848, outside the town of the Commons in County Tipperary, O'Brien and a band of his followers corner a group of constables in a farmhouse owned by a widow named McCormack. Her children are trapped in the house.
It's a very kid-glove revolution. He's not ruthless. He's not going to do the dishonourable thing. And revolutions and wars are actually won through a touch of that.
He was very principled, a very good man, but he certainly had no concept of the reality of what he was doing.
Hold your fire! Who's in charge here? Who's in charge? Captain, no one wants this day to end in bloodshed. We are all Irishmen here, are we not? Release children, give up your guns, and you're free to leave. You have my word.
Very well, sir.
It's always depicted in British terms as a means of demeaning the young islanders, that this was the battle of Mrs. McCormack's cabbage patch. But in fact, it was a serious enough uprising that everyone was looking for William Smith O'Brien.
The young Irelanders go on the run. Some of them make it to France, but for a prominent figure like O'Brien, there is little hope of escape.
William Smith O'Brien, I'm arresting you for high treason. No, it's none of your business. No.
For his part in the rising, William Smith O'Brien is sentenced to death.
He was actually sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, the ultimate punishment. Now, the last person who'd had that sentence was Robert Emmet.
There is a huge outcry. A petition is raised in Ireland, Britain and the United States.
Their sentence of treason was commuted, and they and other young islanders ended up in Van Diemen's Land. And what a story is that.
The arrival of the Young Irelanders to Van Diemen's Land in November 1849 is an international event. Their trial and sentencing has captured the imagination of the world. Desperate to avoid even more publicity, the authorities offer them a ticket of leave, which is a form of parole that lets them avoid prison, while allowing the authorities to keep a close eye on them.
When he got to Australia, he was told he could be on a ticket of leave, provided he promised not to escape. He said he couldn't give that promise as a gentleman, that he felt it was his duty to escape. These sorts of stories coming back, showing that he still felt for the people here, helped to keep his legend alive, as it were.
And this is, in a sense, a problem for the authorities, because O'Brien actually cultivates a path which will lead to him seen as something of a martyr.
They attempt to silence O'Brien by sending him to a maximum security prison on a remote island just off the coast of Van Diemen's Land.
To find a jail in one of the loveliest spots formed by nature, in one of her loneliest solitudes, creates a revulsion of feeling I cannot describe.
It's not hunger, maybe thunder, hardly horrifying dreams. I've never felt so lonesome in such fine beauty. The hope is near expired. My love I long to see, but a token not allowed.
O'Brien is already seen as a martyr to Irish independence. A group of sympathizers organize for him to escape on board a Yankee trading vessel. In a cruel piece of theatre, just as freedom appears within his grasp, the boat sent to pick him up turns back. The colonial authorities have known about the plan for some time.
Now we have to remember that by then, these men were famous in Europe and the US. William Smith O'Brien was the Mandela of his age.
He is sent to Port Arthur, a prison located on the Tasman Peninsula. The narrow strip of land joining it to the mainland is guarded by savage dogs. This is the most feared prison in the Empire. Although O'Brien is housed in a small cottage on his own, no guard, official or convict is permitted to talk to him. But he is allowed to write.
Death must be terrible indeed, if it be not preferable to such a life as I have led since I left the shores of Ireland. Port Arthur is a spot which has witnessed more of human suffering than almost any spot of equal size on the globe. The convicts are not human. Their training in crime has made them sub-to-human, pre-to-human. And the system of British reformatory discipline has gone as near to making them perfect fiends as human wit can go.
So William Smith O'Brien became a thorn in the side of the British government, and he used his period of imprisonment to make connection with the anti-transportation movement and became a kind of pivotal part of their campaign.
Eventually, his many supporters across the globe convince him to accept a ticket of leave. Once free, he takes an active part in Australian politics and is feted by many of the prominent citizens in the colony.
I've undergone imprisonment for 6 years. And as a transported convict, I've not only witnessed many different forms of penal discipline,
but also the earliest processes of colonization. Now it occurs to me that I could not employ my time more usefully than by endeavoring to frame a view of this society and thus develop for it the principles of organization, legislation, administration, such as are applicable in all free states.
His popularity even leads a local newspaper to suggest that he would make a better governor than the British appointee, Sir John Denison. O'Brien becomes a frequent guest at the home of a fellow Irishman and one of the colony's strongest opponents of transportation, Captain Michael Fenton.
Good night, Mrs. Fenton, and thank you.
Fenton was determined to see Australia gain the democratic freedoms denied in his homeland.
I see great opportunities for the future of this colony. Opportunities that were not afforded to the people of Ireland. However, you must demand your political liberty and self-governance. It will not be given easily.
I agree.
To liberty.
So we did harbour the most distinguished of political prisoners in our day. During his time in Van Diemen's Land, William Smith O'Brien wrote a constitution for Tasmania. And when Tasmania got its constitution as a sovereign state in the mid-1850s, he said if Ireland had this document, we could live peaceably. So he was a statesman, really. He wasn't a revolutionary. But of course, Ireland had never got a document like the Constitution of Van Diemen's Land.
William Smith O'Brien is important because of his nobility and his ancient lineage. It's hard for us to understand this today, where we're used to democracy. But for democracy and freedom of colonies to occur, you actually need people from the ruling class often to break off and join with the majority. And that's what O'Brien did.
To liberty.
In 1856, O'Brien was finally allowed to return home to his wife and children in Ireland. He retires from politics and dies in 1864, an honoured hero. Gentlemen like William Smith O'Brien are the exception rather than the rule. The majority of the 3,600 men, women and children transported to Australia as political prisoners were from the working classes. For these convicts, life in the colonies is harsh, brutal and full of uncertainty. Most are illiterate and do not cast a large shadow on history. Their lives are recorded in bureaucratic records, but their stories go with them to the grave. There are, however, exceptions. The stories of two Welsh rebels survive in remarkable detail because of the nature of their protests.
And they blessed Rebecca and said unto her, Be thou the mother of thousands, and let thy seed possess the gate of those that hate you. This was the line from Genesis 24:60 that inspired the daughters of Rebecca, a rural jacquerie that enveloped parts of West Wales in the early 1840s.
We talk about unrest in the coalfield and industrial discontent, but it's important for us to remember that in places like Wales, there was also rural discontent. A range of issues particularly important were the toll roads, because your small farmers, your common people, they needed to move their goods. In order to move their goods, they had to pay tolls, and that was becoming crippling for them. So it's not surprising that things like the toll gates, the toll houses, became targets. Now, if you're going to do things like attack toll gates, disguise is quite a good idea.
The Daughters of Rebecca are the culmination of a tradition of violent political action in Wales. They have been called the hitmen of Chartism.
Destroy it, lads!
In the early 1840s, they terrorised toll gatekeepers across West Wales. Operating under the cover of darkness, dressed in women's clothing, they smashed toll gates. Only 2 Rebeccites are ever charged for their part in the riots. Shoni Shkibaravour, aka John Jones, and David Davies, aka Di Cantor, are arrested in 1843 after destroying a toll gate. They make an odd couple. Shoni, a former soldier, hired muscle and bare-knuckle brawler, and Di, the sensitive soul, a poet and singer who attends chapel. The lament to Wales he pens before he leaves is haunting and prophetic.
Though wounding were the wicked blows, the cruel world hath struck at me, I have a strength I cannot break, my human pride, my dignity. They bound my hands with prison chains, and yet my soul they could not bind. Now far across the sundering sea, I drag my sorely troubled mind. My father's home, its tender care, I know I shall not see again.
Get your back into it.
The largest group of political offenders were rural people, people from the country, not from large metropolitan areas, not people who were highly literate, and not people that were engaged in wider political causes, but were protesting changes in their local circumstances.
Shoni has been called the worst behaved prisoner ever to come to Van Diemen's Land. Many offences are recorded against him for refusing to work, assaulting overseers, demanding food and water. He has been portrayed as a mindless thug, but was there more to Shoni? Was he standing up for his rights within an unfair system?
Now, one of the things that we're starting to understand is that convict Australia was much, much more political than we thought in the past. The whole way that the convict system was organised was that it was designed to atomise the workers, so that you couldn't see collective action. So their punishments were recorded on their own individual charge sheets. It's only in a computer age when we extract the contents of each individual charge sheet and start to line them up, start to line up the dates in which the offences occurred, that we see how many gang strikes there were, how many times that convicts refused to eat their rations, downed their tools, ran away en masse. There was an intensely day-to-day political reaction against convict transportation.
Shoni bucks the system for 14 years before he gets his ticket of leave.
Be mine, boy. Be my boy!
Nonetheless, during his time in the colonies, he received hundreds of lashes. His old friend Di Cantor also struggles in this harsh alien environment.
Sing us a song. Your turn. Come on. Sing us that song. Come on. Oh.
Like many convicts of the era, his fondness for a drink is his downfall. Being drunk on the job, failing to turn up for work detail, a fray in a public house, his offences are numerous. He is eventually reduced to singing for his beer at local pubs.
Jack Williams and poor Joe were 3-gallon poacher boys. The country all doesn't know. And by the Lord of the
But there is light at the end of the tunnel for Di and Shoni. Zephaniah Williams' coal mines go from strength to strength. By 1854, he has established a thriving business.
My dear Joan, The climate here is one of the healthiest in the world, and has little or no sickness. And when you come here, you will find a kind and hospitable people to meet you. If there are any farming men in Wales that would like to emigrate here, tell them I am prepared to furnish them land and render some assistance in cultivation of the same.
Zephaniah Williams does what many Welsh migrants to the United States or other parts of Australia did, especially those who were establishing industrial enterprises, say coal mining, for example. He looks to Wales for the skilled labour to help him to run the mine. So in a sense, you could say that he's an emigration promoter.
What you see before you is the product of a long struggle. I've got my pits into coal. And a more satisfactory triumph was never to be had by anyone over his enemies.
Williams took Dai Cantor and Shoni Shgibravar under his wing.
Dai Cantor, welcome to La Trobe, a little piece of Wales in Tasmania. I hope you'll feel at home here.
Die! Why do men who have bullets and silver fear those who seek no more than ballots and bread? Ballots and bread, ballots and bread. Those who seek no more than ballots and bread.
Williams became known as the King of Coal. He passed away in 1874. He left behind 2 children who would continue his legacy. His grandson became a Liberal MP and served for 23 years. Zephaniah Williams' life showed that given an opportunity to participate, anyone could succeed and contribute to society. But in Britain, there are few opportunities for an ordinary person to succeed. The people's movement, Chartism, continues to challenge this unfair system. In London, one man comes to the fore, William Cuffay. The son of a freed slave from the West Indies, he is a tailor by trade and radical in his politics. In 1848, he is a prominent organiser of the largest Chartist rally in history, Kennington Common. The Chartists go to great lengths to ensure a peaceful rally, but the government are worried. Extra police and military are brought in, and Queen Victoria flees London.
The Kennington Rally of 1848 was to be the high point of the Chartist move towards triumph. The Chartist version was that something like 500,000 people had gathered. And of course this was the message. The people, that wonderful term, the people, have gathered to demand their rights.
The Chartists present a petition to the government containing 2 million signatures demanding the charter be adopted, but it is rejected out of hand.
It didn't work. In retrospect, it couldn't have worked. And of course, the British government, in spite of their nervousness about what's happening on the continent, are far more confident than continental governments. They have a record of surviving.
Cuffay and his comrades are fired up by the rejection of the petition. They hold secret meetings across London, but the government has spies everywhere.
Every good act was set aside in Parliament. Everything that is likely to do any good to the working class is thrown out. But a law to restrain our liberties, well, that is passed in a few hours. My friends, the time has now come for action.
There was a concept that runs through English radicalism, really all the way from the Peasants' Revolt in the 14th century, through the Civil War, through Chartism. They were coming forward with some really new radical ideas that everybody should be part of the political process.
For the British establishment, these are dangerous ideas, and they are determined to crush Cuffay.
William Cuffay, I'm arresting you for making war against the Crown.
You got a warrant?
Don't need one. Grab him, lads. What have we got here? Primed and loaded. You're a dangerous little man, Mr. Cuffay. Take him away.
Oh, no!
We find the defendant guilty.
Order! William Cuffay, you have been found guilty of waging war upon Her Gracious Majesty. Do you have anything to say for yourself before I pass sentence?
It has not been a fair trial. And my request to be tried by my equals has not been complied with. Everything has been done to raise a prejudice against me. And the press of this country, and I believe of other countries too, has done all in its power to smother me with ridicule. I ask no pity. I ask no mercy. I am not anxious for martyrdom. But after what I have endured this week, I feel I could bear any punishment proudly, even to the scaffold.
Cuffay is sentenced to transportation for life.
What is surprising is this man, who is clearly seen as treasonous and seditious danger, as a radical, very quickly rises to prominence in the radical movement in Tasmania.
Fellow London Chartists raise money for his wife to join him in Van Diemen's Land. He arrives in a society still governed by the Masters and Servants Act. Workers are not allowed to leave their job without the permission of their employer, while the employer can sack workers without notice.
The other thing which is interesting about Cuffay is he came from a West Indian background, so he knew about slavery. And Cuffay would have picked up very, very quickly on the way in which transportation was not just designed as a mechanism for punishing people for the crimes that they had committed, but it was a way of extracting cheap labour that would enable Britain's Australian colonial possessions to develop from the bodies of convicts. And that's just the kind of thing that would have really fired him up.
Cuffay campaigns against the Act. His most famous speech would be on the stage of the Theatre Royal in Hobart.
Now then, Bill, this is an important one. Let's hear it one more time, eh?
Fellow slaves, I am old, I am tired, and I am out of work. I have reason to complain. The working classes of this colony have amongst their body many intelligent men with minds capable of the highest acquisitions, unless they have the moral courage, the manliness, and the determination to rise up against a measure which will forge the galling fetters of tyranny and injustice upon their liberty. And I say they deserve to be enslaved.
My name is William Cuffay. By trade I am a tailor. I've been called a yellow jacket, a Chartist and a traitor. But I have no shame, no convict stain has left its mark on me. for I am that rarest of all birds, an English revolutionary.
For he is that rarest of all birds, an English revolutionary.
It is the British Empire's boast that slavery's done away. They should come down to Van Diemen's land, where the poor work for no pay.
In 1853, the Anti-Transportation League succeeded in ending transportation to Van Diemen's Land. And the battle is finally won in 1867, when the Crown agrees to stop sending convicts to Australia. In October, the last convict ship leaves Britain for Western Australia. On board the Hougoumont are 66 members of the Fenians, the last political convicts to arrive on Australian shores. Backed by Irish Americans, the Fenians are the first rebel group to emerge since the famine. In 1867, they launch a series of chaotic raids in Ireland and on the British mainland.
The advantage now was that the diaspora were coming in. Those who had gone out through the famine beforehand, during the famine and afterwards to the United States. Those who had done reasonably well out there had money perhaps, but certainly they still had this hatred of what had happened to their country.
They're a disaster in the short term. Their rebellion or attempted rebellions are as useless and as lacking in any result as 1848. But I think in the long term they have a huge impact.
Among the Fenians is a young Dublin barrister, John Flood. He is arrested for his part in an arms raid on Chester Castle in England.
He showed his entrepreneurial skills even on the ship. He was involved with setting up a newspaper there, a one-sheet, handwritten newspaper. Very well produced, nice little sort of banner headline on it. And these would be read to the prisoners at a gathering on board ship. The way of uniting the prisoners, keeping them together.
Gentlemen, can I have your opinion on my latest editorial? This great continent of the South, having been discovered by some Dutch skipper and his crew somewhere between the 1st and 9th century of the Christian era, was, in consequence, taken possession of by the government of Great Britain, in accordance with that just and equitable maxim, what's yours is mine, what's mine is my own. That magnanimous government, in the kindly exuberance of their feelings, have placed a large portion of that immense tract of country called Australia at our disposal, generously defraying all expense incurred on our way to it and providing retreats for us there to secure us from the inclemency of the seasons.
What you have to say of the Irish people of that period, they could deliver a Jeremiah, a condemnation from the mountaintop. Like, if they'd had artillery like that, they would have won all the battles. But they could sweep the field with their contempt and their oratory. And sometimes I think they spent too long thinking that because they had the best words and the best images, that actually won the battle. Whereas, in fact, the good old practical British government knew otherwise, that it is the hardware of war and the possession of real estate that brings you the victory.
As a convict, Flood is put to work as a surveyor, helping to develop the growing colony.
Mark.
Flood is a model prisoner who sees the possibilities for an Irishman in Australia. He receives a ticket of leave in 1871. In Sydney, Flood establishes a newspaper called The Irish Citizen, aimed at the many Irish Australians in that city.
I've the latest edition here.
Later, he moves to Queensland and becomes the owner and editor of the Gympie Times.
Political and social change requires a change of the heart as well as a change in the mind. And these are both done through media and culture. So it's one thing to have battles and revolutions, but you actually need to change the way people think or show them possibilities. Ultimately, their goals were achieved. That is, the extension of democracy to all people, including working class people. But it was achieved because they were brave. They had the strength of their convictions. They were prepared to surrender their liberty for what they believed in. Australian democracy was achieved through the liberal reform movement. That was once considered a very radical, dangerous idea, and the political prisoners of the 19th and late 18th century suffered for. And in remembering the political prisoners, we're acknowledging the true foundations of our democracy, not just those individuals, but the movements that they were part of.
Until now, the stories of the political exiles have remained captives of their own national histories. Australians are bequeathed an inspiring legacy: liberalism, republicanism, trade unionism, working class politics, democracy, responsible government, all arrive in the colonies shackled in chains. William Cuffay lived long enough to witness the departure of the last British Army regiments from Australian shores. He sees the arrival of the 8-hour day and many of the civil rights to which he had dedicated his life. When he dies a pauper in 1870, there are glowing obituaries in newspapers across Australia and Britain. Cuffay saw the Chartist dream of votes for all men become a reality across much of Australia. In Britain, it would not be until 1918, after World War I, that a man like him would be allowed to vote.